IS is a symptom or a manifestation of a feeling that is very deep amongst Sunni Arabs of being disenfranchised. Not just disenfranchised in the sense of not having power, but also being badly ruled by regimes that are dictatorial, brutal in their authoritarianism, corrupt, and that have not lived up to their promises when it comes to economic development and providing jobs and services and so on. And it's the same sentiment that led to the emergence of Al-Qaeda, by the way. So IS is just a faction that broke off from Al-Qaeda, largely because IS argued that Al-Qaeda was not radical enough in its violence against Shias. And if the Sunnis of Iraq were not disenfranchised, if the war in Syria had not become so violent, and that the regime in Syria had not so brutalized its own population, largely Sunni population, then IS would probably not have emerged. It has, yeah, seriously weakened Al-Qaeda. There's no question about it, that Al-Qaeda is, first of all, after bin Laden's death, the person who took over Al-Qaeda is a man called Al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian doctor, a medical doctor. And he's a man with extremely little charisma and eloquence. He really doesn't, he doesn't speak very well, and he is mired in details, and just doesn't have the appeal, the leadership appeal that bin Laden had. And he's a very controversial figure with it, because he privileges Egyptians over others and so on within Al-Qaeda. So, you know, Al-Qaeda had two handicaps. On the one hand, it had poor leadership after bin Laden, and on the other hand, there was this emergence of a much more, quote, effective but radical movement called IS that undermined Al-Qaeda's claims to being the standard bearer and leader of the jihad. And you can see this now. Lots of different Al-Qaeda franchises and groups in North Africa and Arabia, Egypt, and so on are pledging allegiance to IS, to the Islamic State. And you can see their statements on IS's website. Right, so IS, the Islamic State, regards the rulers of the Gulf, whether it's the Saudi rulers or the Kuwaiti rulers or the rulers in the UAE or Qatar, they regard them as apostates, as non-Muslims, as people who have abandoned Islam because they are in alliance with the West and because they persecute Muslims, jihadis in their countries, and also because they don't apply Islamic law. So by declaring them apostate families, these ruling families, they are legitimate targets of attack of IS. So IS represents a real threat to these families. So these families, these royal families, have mobilized their military forces against IS, but what needs to be underscored and understood is that the populations of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, are not necessarily in favor of attacking IS. So this is a very controversial policy that is led by the elites, the political elites, but is not necessarily supported by the masses. And we don't know exactly what the support for IS is amongst the masses because they don't allow for polling. But my sense, anecdotally, just from being there and talking to people, is that many people are not in favor of the attacks on IS, especially since IS is being attacked by both the West and by Iran and the Shia simultaneously.